He threw her suitcase down the marble steps like it meant nothing. Clothes spilled, a framed wedding photo shattered. Then he looked at her, after 23 years of marriage, and said the words that would follow him for the rest of his life. "Get out of my house. You're nothing but a relic of my past." The iron gates stood open. Neighbors watched from behind curtains. Security guards pretended not to listen, and standing beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, was the woman he planned to replace her with. He believed, with absolute certainty, that the house, the fortune, and the future all belonged to him. What he didn't realize was that the moment she walked away without arguing was the moment everything he owned began slipping out of his hands. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you, and if you're new here, click on the subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Who was this woman who didn't beg? Why did she leave without lawyers, without tears, without a fight? And why, 3 weeks later, would this same man be standing in a silent boardroom, staring at a single document as his entire world collapsed? This is not just a story about money. It's about patience, about underestimation, and about the quiet power of knowing when to say nothing at all. Think about the last time someone underestimated you, the last time someone looked at you and decided you weren't worth their respect. How did that feel? Did you fight back immediately, or did you wait? Because this woman, the one thrown out of her own home like yesterday's trash, she waited, and her patience would teach one man a lesson he'd never forget. His name was Trevor Ashford, and if you'd asked him 5 years ago where he came from, he'd tell you with pride that he came from nothing. A cramped garage in Detroit, a folding table from a thrift store, a borrowed laptop with a cracked screen. Trevor liked to remind people of that, especially her. By the time he was 45, he was a self-made millionaire. Real estate development, commercial properties, strip malls that turned into shopping centers, parking lots that became high-rise apartments. By 50, his name was in business magazines. By 52, he believed that loyalty had an expiration date. Money had hardened him. Success had taught him one dangerous lesson, that he'd done it all alone, that the people who'd been there at the beginning were just background noise in the story of his greatness. And the person he'd erased most completely from that story was the woman who'd been there from day one. Her name was Diane Ashford, though by the time this story reaches its end, she'd go back to her maiden name, Diane Montgomery. Diane wasn't flashy, never had been. She was a librarian when Trevor met her, 27 years old, soft-spoken, observant, the kind of woman who listened more than she spoke, who noticed details other people missed, who remembered things people said in passing. Trevor had been 32 when they met, working 2 jobs, trying to scrape together enough money to buy his first property, a rundown duplex on the east side. The bank had laughed at him, told him he didn't have enough collateral, didn't have a strong enough financial history, told him to come back when he was serious. Diane had been there that day. They'd been dating for 3 months. She'd watched him leave that bank with his shoulders slumped, his confidence shattered, and she'd made a decision. She took out a loan, put her small inheritance from her grandmother up as collateral, co-signed on the property with him, didn't ask for her name on the deed, just wanted to help him get started. "You'll pay me back when you can," she'd said. "I believe in you." Trevor bought that duplex, renovated it himself, nights and weekends, while working his day job, rented it out, used the income to save for the next property, and then the next, and Diane was there for all of it. When he worked until 2 in the morning, she brought him coffee and made sure he ate. When banks hesitated on the second property, she helped him organize his financials, prepare his presentations, rehearse his pitch, until he felt confident. When he signed contracts, she read every line twice, caught clauses that would have buried him, asked questions he hadn't thought to ask. She never asked for credit, never demanded recognition. She just wanted him to succeed. They got married when Trevor bought his 5th property, a small ceremony, 20 people. Diane wore a simple white dress she'd found on sale. Trevor wore a suit he'd bought specifically for business meetings. He was 35, she was 30, and they were happy, or at least she thought they were. The first 10 years of their marriage were good. Trevor's business grew steadily. They moved from a small apartment to a modest house, then to a bigger house, then to a house with a view. Diane kept working at the library. She liked her job, liked the quiet, liked helping people find books, research information, discover new authors. Trevor used to joke that she was married to the Dewey Decimal System. But somewhere around year 12, things started to change. Trevor's business exploded. He landed a major development deal, a commercial plaza that brought in 7 figures. Suddenly, he wasn't just comfortable, he was wealthy, and wealth changed him in ways Diane hadn't anticipated. He started caring about things that hadn't mattered before: what car he drove, what watch he wore, what restaurants he was seen at, who he was photographed with. He hired a personal assistant, then a publicist, then a stylist, started doing interviews about his self-made success story, started getting invited to exclusive events, charity dinners, business galas, and he started asking Diane not to come. "You wouldn't enjoy it," he'd say. "It's all business talk, boring networking stuff. You'd be miserable." At first, Diane believed him, trusted him, spent those evenings at home with a book, not thinking much of it. But then she started noticing other things: the way he'd glance at her clothes before they went anywhere together, like he was mentally cataloguing everything wrong with her outfit. The way he'd subtly correct her in front of his new business associates, as if her opinions were embarrassments. The way he'd stopped asking about her day, stopped listening when she talked, stopped seeing her as a partner, and started seeing her as an accessory that no longer matched his aesthetic. By year 15, Trevor was a different man entirely. Or maybe he'd always been this man, and money had just given him permission to show it. He moved them into a mansion, 10,000 square feet, 8 bedrooms, a circular driveway with a fountain, iron gates with a security system, marble floors imported from Italy, a kitchen Diane never cooked in because Trevor preferred to eat out or have meals catered. The house felt like a museum, beautiful, cold, empty. Diane hated it, but Trevor loved it, loved showing it off, loved hosting parties where business contacts could walk through and be impressed, loved the way it made him feel important, successful, untouchable. Around year 18, Diane started noticing the distance between them wasn't just emotional anymore. Trevor was physically absent, late nights at the office, weekend business trips, a second phone he'd leave face down on the table. She didn't want to believe what she was seeing, didn't want to be that wife, the suspicious one, the paranoid one, but the signs were everywhere. And then one evening, she found a receipt, dinner for 2, at an expensive restaurant. The same night Trevor had told her he was working late, she didn't confront him immediately. Instead, she waited, watched, paid attention, and what she saw confirmed everything. Trevor was having an affair with a woman named Vanessa Sterling, 29 years old, blonde, polished, the kind of woman who posted carefully curated photos on social media and called it a lifestyle brand. Vanessa worked in marketing for one of Trevor's development projects, and somewhere along the way, she'd become more than an employee. Diane finally confronted Trevor on a Tuesday night. He'd just come home from another late dinner. She was sitting in the living room, the receipt on the coffee table between them. "Who is she?" Diane had asked quietly. Trevor didn't even blink, didn't stammer or backtrack or try to lie. He just looked at Diane like she was a problem he'd been meaning to deal with. "Does it matter?" he said. Diane felt like she'd been slapped. "Does it matter? Trevor, we've been married for 20 years. 23, he corrected. "And honestly, Diane, I don't know why you're surprised. Look at you. Look at her. You stopped trying years ago." Diane stared at him. "I stopped trying? You're still working at that library. Still dressing like it's 1,995. Still acting like we're living in that first apartment." Trevor stood up, pacing. "I've built an empire. I've become someone. And you're still." I'm still the person who helped you build that empire," Diane said, her voice shaking. "I'm still the person who believed in you when no one else did." Trevor laughed. Actually laughed. "You helped? Diane, you co-signed a loan 20 years ago. That's not building an empire. That's writing a check. I did more than that and you know it. Did you?" Trevor leaned against the fireplace mantel, arms crossed. "Because from where I'm standing, I'm the one who worked 80-hour weeks. I'm the one who took the risks. I'm the one who turned that duplex into this." He gestured around the massive living room. "You just existed." Diane felt tears burning in her eyes but refused to let them fall. "So, what are you saying?" "I'm saying I want a divorce." The words hung in the air. Diane had known they were coming, but hearing them out loud still felt like the ground disappearing beneath her. "And I'm saying," Trevor continued, "that you need to be realistic. You didn't build this. I did. So don't come at me with lawyers trying to take half of something you had nothing to do with." Diane stood slowly. "I had everything to do with it." "Prove it." Trevor's smile was cold. "Go ahead. Try. You'll spend every dollar you have on lawyers, and you'll still walk away with nothing." He moved toward the stairs. "I'm tired. I'll sleep in the guest room. You should start thinking about where you're going to live." And he left her standing there, in the house she'd never wanted, staring at the life she no longer recognized. That conversation happened on a Tuesday. By Friday, Trevor had served her with divorce papers, and by Sunday, he'd decided he was done waiting. That Sunday evening, Trevor came home with Vanessa. He walked through the front door like he owned the place, which, of course, he believed he did. Vanessa was dressed like she was attending a cocktail party. Heels, designer dress. The kind of confidence that comes from believing you've won. Diane was in the kitchen when they walked in. She looked up, startled. Trevor didn't apologize, didn't explain, just said, "Pack your things. I want you out tonight." Diane stared at him. "Tonight? You heard me. This is my house, and I'm done pretending you belong here. Trevor, this is my home too. We can work out arrangements, figure out where I'll stay, but you can't just, 'I can do whatever I want,'" Trevor interrupted. "This is my house. My name is on everything, and I'm telling you to leave." Diane's hands were shaking. She looked at Vanessa, who was smiling slightly, like she was watching a performance she'd been waiting for. "You're really going to do this?" Diane asked. "With her standing right there?" "She has more right to be here than you do," Trevor said. "Now pack, or I'll have security do it for you." Diane felt something break inside her, not her heart. That had been breaking for years. This was something else. Her illusion that Trevor had ever been the man she thought he was. She walked upstairs slowly, pulled a suitcase from the closet, started folding clothes with hands that wouldn't stop shaking, picked up a framed photo from the dresser, one from their wedding day, looked at Trevor's face in that picture, the man who'd promised to love her, to honor her, to build a life with her. That man was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed. She packed quickly. One suitcase. That's all she took. Trevor was waiting at the bottom of the stairs when she came down. He grabbed the suitcase from her hand and walked to the front door, opened it, and then, in a move that would haunt him for the rest of his life, he threw her suitcase down the marble steps. Clothes spilled out. A framed photo hit the stone and shattered. Diane watched it happen in slow motion, and then Trevor said the words, "Get out of my house. You're nothing but a relic of my past." Diane looked at him for a long moment, didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't argue. She just picked up her suitcase and walked through those iron gates without looking back. And as she walked away, Trevor turned to Vanessa, pulled her close, and smiled like he'd just won the lottery. He had no idea that he'd just made the biggest mistake of his life. Diane didn't go to a hotel, didn't go to a friend's house, didn't call her sister in California crying about what had happened. Instead, she drove to a storage unit on the edge of town, a place she'd rented 5 years ago, a place Trevor didn't know about. Inside that unit was a filing cabinet, and inside that cabinet were documents, records, proof of everything. Diane had always been observant, detail-oriented, the kind of person who kept receipts, filed paperwork, remembered dates. And over the past 5 years, as Trevor's behavior had changed, as his arrogance had grown, Diane had started keeping records of everything, not because she was planning for divorce, but because something in her gut told her she needed to protect herself. She'd kept copies of every contract Trevor had ever signed, every property deed, every business formation document, every loan application, everything. And tucked in the very back of that filing cabinet was a folder labeled simply Original Documents. Inside were papers from 23 years ago, from the very beginning, the duplex, the first property, the foundation of everything Trevor had built. And on those documents, 2 names appeared, Trevor Ashford and Diane Montgomery. She'd never changed the deed, never transferred her name off the original LLC they'd formed together, never signed away her stake in the company that had eventually become Ashford Development Group, because Trevor had never asked her to. He'd simply assumed, over the years, that because he was running everything, because his name was on the business cards and the magazine articles, that he owned everything. But he didn't. Legally, technically, on paper, Diane owned 50% of everything, and Trevor had been too arrogant to check. Diane spent that first night in a small extended stay hotel, the kind with a kitchenette and paper-thin walls. It was the opposite of the mansion, but it felt safer, quieter, real. She didn't cry. She'd cried enough over the years. Instead, she opened her laptop and started making calls. The first call was to a lawyer, not one of the big-name attorneys Trevor used. Someone smaller, someone who wouldn't tip him off, a woman named Patricia Chen, who specialized in business law and had a reputation for being thorough. "I need you to review some documents," Diane said when Patricia answered, "and I need you to tell me exactly what I own." By the end of the week, Patricia called her back. "Diane, do you realize what you have here? I have copies of the original LLC documents. I know I'm listed as co-founder, but..." "No," Patricia interrupted. "You don't just have co-founder status. You have equal ownership, 50-50. On paper, you own half of every property, every contract, every asset that's been built under the Ashford Development Group umbrella." Diane felt her breath catch. "That can't be right. Trevor runs everything. He makes all the decisions. He doesn't matter. The original operating agreement was never amended. You're still listed as 50% owner, which means legally, he can't make any major decisions without your approval, and he definitely can't kick you out of a house that's half yours." Diane was silent for a long moment. Then she asked the question that had been burning in her mind since Sunday. "What do I do?" Patricia's answer was simple. "We take back what's yours." Meanwhile, Trevor was celebrating. He'd moved Vanessa into the mansion within days, gave her free rein to redecorate, change whatever she wanted, make the house feel like theirs. Vanessa posted photos on social media. The grand entryway, the chef's kitchen, the backyard with the infinity pool. Captions about new beginnings and living your best life. Trevor's friends congratulated him, told him he'd made the right choice, that Diane had been holding him back, that he deserved someone who matched his energy, his ambition, his lifestyle. Trevor believed every word. He felt lighter, freer, like he'd shed dead weight. He started talking about expanding his business, taking bigger risks, making moves he'd been too cautious to make before. But then small things started to go wrong. A bank called, asking for clarification on a property transfer. Trevor brushed it off. A contractor mentioned that permits were delayed because someone had filed a complaint. Trevor assumed it was a competitor. A lawyer sent an email requesting a meeting to discuss LLC operating agreements. Trevor deleted it. He was too busy, too important, too successful to worry about administrative details. That was what assistants were for. But the emails kept coming. The calls kept coming. And then, 3 weeks after he'd thrown Diane out, Trevor received a certified letter from Patricia Chen, attorney at law, requesting his immediate presence at a meeting to discuss ownership disputes regarding Ashford Development Group. Trevor laughed when he read it, called his own lawyer, a man named Richard Holt, who charged $800 an hour and had never lost a case. "Some nobody lawyer is trying to shake me down," Trevor said. "Probably Diane's desperate attempt to get a settlement. Handle it." Richard reviewed the letter, then called Trevor back. His voice was different, careful. "Trevor, we need to meet. In person. Today." "Why? It's just today," Richard repeated, and something in his tone made Trevor's stomach drop. "If this story has your heart racing, comment, 'I'm still watching.' Let's see who's truly following till the end." The meeting took place in Richard Holt's office. Glass walls, city views, leather chairs that cost more than most people's cars. Trevor walked in expecting to spend 20 minutes laughing about Diane's desperate legal threats and then go have lunch. Instead, Richard had 6 banker's boxes stacked on his conference table. "What is all this?" Trevor asked. "Documents," Richard said, "from the original formation of your company. I had my team pull everything from county records, state filings, LLC registrations, property deeds, everything." "Okay. And you have a problem." Richard opened one of the boxes and pulled out a stack of papers. "When you formed Ashford Development Group 23 years ago, you didn't do it alone. You formed it with Diane. As equal partners, 50-50 ownership split. Trevor waved his hand dismissively. That was a formality. She co-signed on the first property. That's it. Everything after that was me. Except you never amended the operating agreement. You never removed her name. You never bought out her shares. So on paper, legally, Diane still owns 50% of every single asset under the Ashford Development Group umbrella. The room went very quiet. Trevor stared at Richard. That's impossible. It's not only possible, it's documented. Richard spread papers across the table. Here's the original LLC formation. Here's the deed to the first duplex. Here's the operating agreement that governs every business decision you've made since. And nowhere, in any of these documents, does it show Diane relinquishing ownership. Trevor's face went red. She didn't do anything. She sat at home. She worked at a library. She had nothing to do with building this company. Doesn't matter, Richard said calmly. Her name is on the paperwork, which means she owns 50%, which means every major decision you've made in the past 20 years, every property you've bought, every development deal you've signed, legally required her approval. I never got her approval. I know, Richard said, which means technically you've been operating outside the bounds of your own LLC agreement. Trevor stood up, pacing. This is insane. This is a technicality. No judge is going to side with her on this. Actually, Richard said, most judges will, because property law is pretty clear. Ownership is ownership. It doesn't matter if she was active in the business or not. Her name is on the documents. So what do we do? You negotiate, Richard said. You offer her a settlement. You buy her out. You do it quietly before this becomes public. Trevor's jaw clenched. I'm not giving her anything. Trevor. She didn't earn it. Trevor slammed his hand on the table. I built this. I worked for this. I'm not handing over half of everything I own because of some paperwork from 2 decades ago. Richard sat back. Then you're going to lose in court. I'll fight it. And you'll lose. And it'll be public. And messy. And expensive. And at the end of it, you'll still owe her half. Trevor stared at him, breathing hard. Then he said, set up the meeting. The meeting was scheduled for the following Monday. Corporate mediation. Neutral location. Lawyers on both sides. Trevor arrived 15 minutes early. Sat in the conference room tapping his fingers on the table, his leg bouncing with barely contained anger. He'd spent the weekend trying to figure out how Diane had pulled this off. How she'd found a lawyer. How she'd known to look at the old documents. How she'd had the nerve to do this. He'd convinced himself she was bluffing, that this was a scare tactic, that once they sat down and actually looked at the facts, this whole thing would fall apart. And then Diane walked in. She looked different, not defeated, not broken, not like the woman he'd thrown out of the house 3 weeks ago. She looked calm, composed, sure of herself. She was wearing a simple grey suit. Her hair was pulled back, no jewelry, except for a watch. She looked like someone who'd been preparing for this moment for a very long time. She sat down across from Trevor, didn't look at him, just nodded to Patricia, who opened her briefcase and pulled out a folder. Let's begin, Patricia said. Richard spoke first. My client is willing to offer a reasonable settlement in exchange for Miss Montgomery signing over any alleged ownership claims to Ashford Development Group. Alleged? Patricia smiled. There's nothing alleged about it. Miss Montgomery owns 50% of the company. That's not a claim. That's a fact. Miss Montgomery hasn't been involved in business operations for over 20 years. Doesn't matter. She has no knowledge of current contracts, developments, or financials. Doesn't matter. She contributed nothing to the growth of... Doesn't matter, Patricia said again, her voice sharp. Your client built his business on a foundation, Miss Montgomery helped create. Her name is on the original LLC. She never signed away her rights, which means, legally, she owns half. Period. Trevor leaned forward. What do you want? For the first time, Diane looked at him. I want what's mine. You want money. I want what I'm legally owed. Trevor laughed bitterly. You're going to bleed me dry, aren't you? This is revenge. This is justice, Diane said quietly. There's a difference. I gave you everything. You gave me nothing, Diane interrupted. I gave you everything, and you threw me away the moment you didn't need me anymore. Patricia pulled out another document. Here's what we're proposing. Miss Montgomery will accept a buyout of her 50% stake in Ashford Development Group. The amount will be determined by an independent valuation of the company's total assets. Alternatively, if Mr. Ashford refuses, Miss Montgomery is prepared to assert her legal ownership and assume her role as equal partner in all business decisions moving forward. Richard shifted uncomfortably. That's not reasonable. It's more than reasonable, Patricia said. It's generous, because what Miss Montgomery could do, if she wanted to, is freeze every asset, block every sale, halt every development. She has that power as 50% owner, but she's not interested in destroying the company. She just wants what she's owed. Trevor stared at Diane. You planned this? No, Diane said. I prepared for it. There's a difference. The independent valuation took 2 weeks. 2 weeks during which Trevor couldn't sleep, couldn't focus, couldn't do anything but obsess over how much this was going to cost him. His accountants went through every property, every contract, every asset under the Ashford Development Group umbrella. And when the final number came back, Trevor felt like he'd been hit by a truck. $83 million. That was the total value of the company, which meant Diane's 50% stake was worth $41.5 million. Trevor sat in Richard's office, staring at the number on the page. I don't have $41 million, he said. Then you'll have to liquidate assets, Richard said. Sell properties, refinance, take out loans. That'll cripple the business. Or you can offer her a structured payment plan, pay her out over time. For how long? 10 years, maybe 15. Trevor put his head in his hands. This is insane. This is what happens when you don't read your own operating agreements, Richard said bluntly. You got sloppy. You assumed, and now it's catching up with you. Trevor looked up. What if I fight it? What if I argue that she abandoned the company, that she hasn't been involved in decades? You'll lose, and you'll spend another $2 million in legal fees losing, and at the end of it, you'll still owe her the money, plus interest, plus her legal fees. Trevor was silent for a long time. Then he asked the question he'd been avoiding. What about the house? Richard hesitated. What about it? The mansion. Is that part of the company assets? It was purchased under the LLC. So, yes. Trevor felt his stomach drop. She owns half of my house? Technically, yes. Trevor stood up, walked to the window, stared out at the city below. Everything he'd built, everything he'd worked for, and half of it belonged to the woman he'd thrown away. I'll agree to the payment plan, he said finally. But I want her to sign away all rights. I want her name off every document. I want her gone. I'll draft the agreement, Richard said. The final settlement meeting happened 1 month after Diane had been thrown out of the mansion. This time, Trevor arrived without swagger, without arrogance. He looked tired, beaten. Diane, on the other hand, looked stronger than ever. They sat across from each other one final time. Patricia laid out the terms. Mr. Ashford will pay Miss Montgomery $41.5 million over a period of 12 years. Payments will be made quarterly. In exchange, Miss Montgomery will sign over all ownership claims to Ashford Development Group and remove her name from all company documents. Trevor signed without reading. Just wanted it over. Then Diane spoke. There's one more thing. Trevor looked up. What? The house? What about it? I want you out. Trevor's face went pale. You can't be serious. The mansion was purchased under LLC funds. I own half, and I'm not interested in selling my half to you. So, I'm moving back in, and you're moving out. Trevor stood up. No, absolutely not. That's my house. It's half my house, Diane corrected, and I'm invoking my ownership rights. You have 30 days to vacate. This is ridiculous. You don't even like that house. You hated it. You're right, Diane said calmly. I did hate it, but it's still half mine, and I'm keeping it. You can buy me out if you'd like, for another $20 million. Otherwise, you move. Trevor looked at Richard desperately. Richard just shook his head. She has the right. Trevor sank back into his chair, defeated, destroyed. Everything he'd done to Diane, she'd just done back to him, except she'd done it legally, quietly, without throwing a single suitcase down any stairs. 1 month later, Trevor moved out of the mansion. Vanessa left him 2 weeks after that. Turned out, she wasn't interested in dating a man who'd just lost half his fortune and his house. Funny how that works. Diane moved back into the mansion, but she didn't keep it. 3 months later, she sold it, used the money to start a foundation that helped women leaving abusive relationships, women who'd been erased, underestimated, thrown away. She called it the Montgomery Foundation, her name, not his. 2 years after the settlement, Trevor was still paying Diane quarterly payments, reminders 4 times a year of the biggest mistake of his life. His business survived, but barely. He'd had to sell off properties, scale back developments, let go of staff. His reputation took a hit. Word spread in business circles about the divorce, about how he'd underestimated his ex-wife, about how she'd quietly owned half of everything while he'd paraded around like a self-made king. People started asking questions. If he'd missed something that obvious in his own company, what else had he missed? Investors got nervous. Deals fell through. Trevor learned what it felt like to be underestimated, to have people look at you and decide you weren't worth their time. It didn't feel good. Diane, meanwhile, thrived. The Montgomery Foundation became her life's work. She helped hundreds of women, gave them legal resources, financial advice, a place to stay while they rebuilt their lives. And every single one of them heard the same story, about a woman who'd been thrown out of her own house, who'd walked away without a fight, who'd waited, and who'd won, not through revenge, but through preparation. Diane never remarried, didn't need to. She'd learned that her worth wasn't tied to anyone else, that she didn't need someone to validate her. She was enough, all on her own. One afternoon, 3 years after everything, Diane ran into Trevor at a coffee shop downtown. It was awkward, brief. He looked older, tired. "How have you been?" he asked. Diane smiled. "Good, really good. I heard about your foundation. That's good. Thank you." They stood there for a moment, 2 people who used to know each other. Then Trevor said, "I'm sorry for what I did, for how I treated you." Diane looked at him for a long time. Then she said, "I forgive you, not because you deserve it, but because I do." And she walked away, leaving him standing there, just like she'd walked away that night, except this time she was walking towards something, not away from it. So let me ask you something. What would you have done in Diane's position? Would you have fought back immediately, hired lawyers and made noise? Or would you have done what she did, waited, prepared? Let the truth reveal itself. Think about the people in your life who've underestimated you, who've looked at you and decided you weren't important, weren't valuable, weren't worth their time. How did that feel? And more importantly, how did you respond? Because here's what Diane's story teaches us. Revenge is loud, but justice is quiet. Revenge is emotional, but preparation is powerful. Revenge wants to hurt people, but justice just wants things to be right. Diane didn't destroy Trevor because she was angry. She reclaimed what was hers because it was legally, rightfully, undeniably hers. And she did it without raising her voice, without making threats, without becoming the villain in someone else's story. She just showed up, with documents, with evidence, with 23 years of proof that she'd been there from the beginning, and that quiet power changed everything. How many times have you stayed quiet when you should have documented? How many times have you trusted when you should have verified? How many times have you assumed people would do right by you, only to discover they were doing right by themselves? Diane learned early, and it saved her. But here's the other lesson. Trevor lost more than money. He lost his reputation, his relationships, his sense of security, because when you build your life on underestimating people, eventually someone you underestimated will show you exactly who they are, and by then, it's too late. Do you know anyone like Trevor? Someone who believes their success erases their debts, someone who thinks that because they're doing well now, they don't owe anything to the people who helped them get there, someone who rewrites history to make themselves the hero and everyone else irrelevant? Those people always lose. Maybe not today, maybe not tomorrow, but eventually, because you can't build an empire on a foundation of lies and expect it to stand forever. The truth has a way of showing up, usually when you least expect it, and usually in ways you can't fight. Trevor threw Diane's suitcase down marble steps because he thought she had nothing, no power, no options, no recourse. He was wrong about all of it. She had documents, she had patience, and she had something he'd lost a long time ago: integrity. So, if you're watching this and you've ever been thrown away, underestimated, erased from your own story, I want you to know something. Your worth isn't determined by how people treat you. It's determined by how you treat yourself. And if you've been preparing, if you've been documenting, if you've been quietly building a foundation of truth while everyone else is performing for an audience, your time will come. You don't have to shout. You don't have to make threats. You don't have to burn bridges or seek revenge. You just have to know your worth. And when the moment comes, you show up with proof. That's what Diane did, and that's what you can do too. Because the quietest person in the room is often the one holding all the cards. They just haven't played them yet. And when they do, everyone else realizes they were playing the wrong game all along. Think about your own life right now. Are you documenting the things that matter? Are you protecting yourself legally, financially, emotionally? Or are you trusting that people will do right by you simply because they should? Because here's the hard truth. People don't always do what they should. Sometimes they do what benefits them. And if you're not prepared for that, you'll be the one standing outside the gates with a broken suitcase, wondering how everything went so wrong so fast. Diane was prepared. Not because she was paranoid, not because she didn't trust Trevor, but because she understood something fundamental about life. Hope for the best, but prepare for the worst. She hoped their marriage would last. She hoped Trevor would stay the man she married. She hoped they'd grow old together, but she prepared for the possibility that he wouldn't, and that preparation saved her life. Now let me ask you something else. Do you think Diane should have forgiven Trevor? At that coffee shop, 3 years later, when he apologized, should she have accepted it? Or should she have told him exactly what she thought of him and walked away? Because forgiveness is complicated. Some people say you should always forgive, that holding on to anger only hurts you, that letting go is freedom. Other people say forgiveness is earned, that you don't owe absolution to someone who destroyed you, that some actions are unforgivable. Diane chose to forgive, but not for Trevor, for herself. She said it perfectly. I forgive you. Not because you deserve it, but because I do. That's the key. Forgiveness isn't about the other person. It's about releasing yourself from the prison of bitterness. It's about refusing to let someone who hurt you continue to control your emotional state years later. It's about choosing peace over being right. Diane didn't forgive Trevor because she thought he'd changed. She forgave him because she had. She'd moved on, built a new life, found purpose, and she didn't need him to validate her healing. She'd already healed. That's power, real power. Not the kind that comes from money or status or throwing people out of houses, the kind that comes from knowing who you are and not needing anyone else's permission to be that person. Trevor never found that kind of power. Even at the end, even when he apologized, he was still looking for something from Diane. Validation, absolution, permission to stop feeling guilty. But Diane didn't give him that. She gave him forgiveness, which is different. Forgiveness says, I release you from my anger, but it doesn't say, what you did was okay. And that distinction matters. So, here's what I want you to take away from this story. First, document everything. In any important relationship, business partnership, marriage, keep records. Not because you expect things to go wrong, but because if they do, you'll be protected. Second, never let someone rewrite your history. Trevor tried to erase Diane from his success story, tried to pretend she'd contributed nothing, but the paperwork told a different story, and paperwork doesn't lie. Third, patience is a form of power. Diane could have fought Trevor loudly, could have hired private investigators, blasted him on social media, made his life hell. But she didn't. She waited, gathered evidence, let the legal system work, and she won. Not just financially, she won her dignity, her peace, her freedom. And finally, your worth is not up for debate. Trevor told Diane she was worthless, that she'd contributed nothing, that she was a relic of his past. But none of that was true, and Diane knew it. Even when she was standing outside those gates with a broken suitcase, she knew it. That's why she didn't beg, didn't cry, didn't try to change his mind. Because she understood something Trevor never did. Her value wasn't determined by his perception of her. It was determined by the truth, and the truth was that she'd built half of everything he owned. The truth was that she'd been there from the beginning. The truth was that her name was on the documents. and no amount of arrogance or cruelty or revisionist history could change that. Now, before we end, I want to talk about Vanessa for a moment, because it's easy to make her the villain, the young woman who came in and took Diane's place. But here's the thing, Vanessa was a victim too. Not of Diane, of Trevor. Trevor used her, made her believe she was special, that she was different, that their relationship was real. But the moment things got hard, the moment he lost his money and his house, Vanessa left. Because their relationship wasn't built on anything real. It was built on what Trevor could provide. The lifestyle, the status, the mansion. And when those things disappeared, so did she. That's what happens when you build relationships on superficial things. They disappear the moment the surface cracks. Trevor learned that the hard way. He thought Vanessa loved him, but she loved what he represented. And there's a difference. Diane had loved Trevor, the real Trevor, the one who worked in a garage and dreamed big dreams, the one who wasn't too proud to accept help, the one who used to look at her like she was the most important person in his world. But that Trevor was gone. Maybe he'd never really existed. Maybe he'd always been the man who threw suitcases downstairs, and Diane had just been too hopeful to see it. Either way, she was better off without him. And deep down, Trevor knew it. That's why his apology, 3 years later, felt so hollow. Because he wasn't apologizing for hurting her. He was apologizing because he'd lost. And there's a difference. A real apology takes responsibility, acknowledges harm, seeks to make amends. Trevor's apology was just regret that things hadn't worked out in his favor. That's not the same thing. So, as we close this story, I want you to think about the people you've underestimated. The quiet ones. The ones who don't demand attention. The ones who work behind the scenes while others take credit. The ones who do the right thing even when no one's watching. Those people are watching you. They're taking notes. They're documenting. And one day, if you're not careful, they'll show you exactly what you missed. Don't be Trevor. Don't be the person who throws away loyalty because you think you don't need it anymore. Don't be the person who rewrites history to make yourself the hero. Don't be the person who underestimates the people who helped you get where you are. Because those people, they have the receipts, and eventually, receipts always come due. Be someone who honors the people who helped you, who acknowledges their contributions, who treats them with the dignity they deserve. Not because it's strategic, but because it's right. And if you're someone who's been thrown away, underestimated, erased, remember this: your story isn't over. The person who dismissed you doesn't get to write your ending. You do. And the best endings? They're not about revenge. They're about rising, about rebuilding, about proving, not to them, but to yourself, that you were always enough. Diane didn't need Trevor's mansion. She didn't need his money. She didn't even need his apology. She just needed to remember who she was. And once she did, everything else fell into place. So thank you for watching this story. Thank you for staying until the end. If this resonated with you, if you've ever been underestimated or thrown away or told you weren't enough, leave a comment. Tell us your story, because every person who's been dismissed deserves to know they're not alone. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone who's going through a divorce, a betrayal, a moment where they feel powerless, share this video with them. Let them know that quiet doesn't mean weak, that patience doesn't mean passive, that preparation beats performance every single time. Hit that like button if this story moved you. Subscribe so you don't miss our next one, because we have more stories like this, more truths that need to be told, more voices that deserve to be heard. And remember, the next time someone underestimates you, don't get loud, get ready, because the quietest victories are often the most devastating, and the person who walks away without a fight, they're not giving up, they're just getting started. Until next time, remember this: you are not defined by how people treat you, you're defined by how you respond. And the best response? It's not revenge. It's living well. It's building something beautiful. It's becoming someone they can't ignore, not because you're trying to prove them wrong, but because you've proven yourself right. And that's all that matters.